God's story, your life. Unfolding short stories.
I sat down to record this story with John O'Leary, and beforehand I was thinking, this is probably going to be a really good story. The reason being, they made a movie about his life. But I was not expecting that by the end of this short story, John would have me in tears. Now, when I was a kid, I did so many stupid things with fire, fireworks, gas cans, bonfires, and the like. And I'm glad I made it to the other side relatively unscathed. But there are so many stories of kids playing with fire, doing something similar to what John did, and what I and so many boys have done before, and where they weren't so lucky. That's where John's story starts. His story is about a fire that changed the course of his life, with a reminder that God is present, especially in our darkest moments. Now keep in mind, this story is so good that William H. Macy is starring in this film that will be in theaters here in about 10 days. Soul on Fire opens October 10th, and it's the story of this guy, John O'Leary.
One of the most amazing things about my story is that although it is now being lived out so publicly, my dream for the vast majority of my life was to keep it as private and as personal as possible. And I think when you hear how God has worked through this story in my life, you'll understand maybe even more personally how he's working through your story in your life. So let me give you a little bit of context. When I was 9 years old, I watched boys in my neighborhood play with fire and gasoline. They were neighbors of mine, and I figured if these big old 11-year-olds could do it and get away with it, so could I. So on a Saturday morning with my mom and dad both gone at work, I walked into the garage. No one was there. Walked over to a can of gasoline, bent over this 5-gallon container with a piece of lit flame coming out of a little piece of paper. Try to pour a little bit of the fluid toward it, and before the liquid even came out, the fumes pulled the flame back into the container, created this massive explosion, split the metal can in two. It picked up the 9-year-old. It launched me 20 feet against the far side of the garage, and it set my world on fire. At one moment, I was this ordinary, happy, rambunctious, normal little Midwest kid, man. Life was awesome. God was good. It was easy. Parents were together. And then in the next, I found myself in a hospital bed with burns on 100% of my body. 87% of my body was third degree. I'm laying in this hospital bed dying. And the only thought I had as a child was, oh my gosh, the light's coming down on me. I know I'm dying. And the only thought I had was, my dad is going to kill me when he finds out. My father's going to freak out when he finds out I blew up his house. That was the only thought I had. I hear his voice down the hall. He's yelling at some poor nurse. Where is my boy, John? She does me no favor. She brings him back into this room. She should have called security, pulls back the curtain. This old man marches in, led by this nurse, walks over to me, points down, and then I hear through the darkness these words, John, look at me when I'm talking to you. So I look up at my dad, and then he says, I have never been so proud of anyone in my entire life, and my little buddy today, this morning. I'm just glad to be your dad. And then my father says, I love you. And there's nothing you can do about it. And as a kid, my friends, I remember crossing my arms and shutting my eyes tight, thinking, oh my gosh, nobody told my dad what happened. Maybe I can get away with this thing. But I think my father knew. And I think what he is introducing me to is just grace and mercy and love and tenderness. And his grace and his love and his tenderness did not make the journey forward easy. What does, man? What would have? It did not make the 5.5 months of hospitalization go quicker. What would? Did not make rounds of amputation less painful. But I think it made the journey forward possible. That began my journey. It was like meeting me at the well as I was, without judgment, in love. And it changed my world. But one of the commitments I made coming through this time in hospital and through these bandage changes and through these rounds of amputation and through these struggles was I would never be defined by those wounds. I would never be defined by those scars. I would never be defined by that wheelchair, or maybe one day when I had the ability to step away from it. I would live a very ordinary, normal life. And so my dream as a child and as a young person was not one day to stand out, shine. My desire was to fit in. It was to fade. It was to be ordinary. And that's what I did for a long time. I masked up. I covered it up with long sleeves. I covered it up with humor. I covered it up eventually with alcohol and everything else that I think sometimes we do when we are uncomfortable in our own skin or our own lives. So that's what I did for a long, long time until my late 20s. I'm working construction. I'm 28 years old. And I find myself in the back row of a church service. Who knew? My arms are crossed. I'm bored, not just by the message, but by life. You ever been there? You ever just been bored by that messenger, by the message, by life, beat down by it all? That's how I felt. And so my arms are crossed. I'm in the back row. I'm looking down, and the pastor's talking about the gift of talents. And finally, it doesn't just stop at those with 5 or 2 or 1. He comes to those of us with 0. And that was me. And I promise you on this episode, maybe it's some of you, you can't be used for good. That's how you feel, at least. And the pastor, although the church had about 500 folks in it, looks at me, feels like, and he says, and for those of you who feel like life has already passed you by and you cannot be used for good, listen to me. Your life is a precious, priceless gift. And with that gift, you've got one job now. It is to say yes to being used for good. So I left that service, unsure what to really do with it, but I wrote it down in my journal that night. Say yes to being used for good. The following day, I'm working construction. I mean, can y'all think of a worse job for a dude without fingers, with scars from his neck to his toes, than carpentry? Man, what are you doing, O'Leary, in your late 20s, man? Not much good, but I think I'm trying to climb the ladder and show the world that I'm enough, I can do hard things too. That's what I'm trying to prove out. But my phone rings. This is how God shows up. My phone rings. I answer it. And a little voice says to me, Mr. John, will you speak at my school? And my first thought was like, about what? I'd never spoken anywhere about anything. I'm an introvert by nature. I try to hide out in the shadows, and I work in carpentry. What would I speak about? So this little girl says, I heard about how you were burned, and I thought you could share that with my class. And my friends, like in any ordinary setting, after any other day of the week, I would have always said no to her. But on the heels of receiving a message that my life was a precious gift and that I had one job now, say yes. I awkwardly said, yes, I'll do it. Took the dare. 2 weeks later, stood up in front of this room, never once looked up at those little monsters. 3rd grade girls, man, tough audience. But that's my first one. 6-minute keynote in front of 3rd grade Girl Scouts. And afterwards walked out to my truck feeling like I let him down. But one of the dads pulled me aside and said, John, that was awesome. Would you speak at my Rotary Club? And 2 weeks earlier, I'd been told that my life was a precious gift and that I had one job. Say yes to being used for good. So I said, yeah, I'll do that. In that room, there was someone from a Kiwanis Club. In that room, there was someone from a Chamber of Commerce. In that room, there was someone who ran the prison system for Kansas. And this awkward, introverted, scarred nobody just kept saying, yeah, I'll go. I'll serve. I'll say yes. That yes has led to 2,700 speeches in 50 states, dozens of countries in front of millions and millions of people, ultimately reminding them that their life is a precious, priceless gift and they got one job. Say yes to being used for good. It also led to Las Vegas, speaking at the MGM in front of 28,000 people. And after speaking to them and playing the piano afterwards and walking out and doing a book signing, one of the individuals in that book signing, her name was Linda, said, John, have you ever thought about turning your story into a film? And like any good, normal human being, I said, no. Right? No, I've never thought about turning my life into a film, Linda. And she said, would you mind if I tried? So I said, Yeah. I learned that answer a long time ago. The answer to service is yes. So I said, you're welcome to try. So Linda began working on this project. She created some seed money. They hired someone to write the screenplay for Soul on Fire. They brought in this man who struggled in his faith. People from various faith backgrounds came around this thing. They wrote the screenplay. Then we needed to fund the thing. We had to raise millions of dollars. How do you do that? One friend at a time, I found out. Just one friend at a time, one friend at a time. And one friend saying yes, after one friend saying yes, we eventually were able to raise enough, but we bumped into a struggle at the end. I told one of my friends what the struggle was. We had to raise the remaining 30%. How do we get to the finish line? And he said, well, I'm having lunch this coming weekend with the governor of our state. I live in Missouri. He said, I know there's a film credit that they've been thinking about doing for 13 years. Would it help if I talked to him about it? That's like how God works. And I said, I guess you can talk to the governor of our state about this. Yes. They had that lunch on a Sunday. On Tuesday, it was signed into law that we could get back 30% of the investment we made into the state back into those who funded this throughout the state. And so this unlikely project continued forward. We brought in actors from around the country. Joel Courtney plays John O'Leary. William H. Macy plays Jack Buck, this radio announcer who helped save my life. John Corbett plays my dad. Stephanie Shostak from Iron Man plays my mom. Macy McLean plays my wife. All these incredible people, not only great actors, but humble servants who said yes to this project. So Sony Affirm has now taken Soul on Fire. It is rolling into theaters around the country. October 10th, it shows up in theaters. It is the story of a hero. And my favorite part about this film is the hero is not John O'Leary, not by a long shot. The hero is the brother, my brother Jim, who saved my life by putting out the fires the day I was burned. The hero is my mom, who came in and challenged me, baby, if you want to live, take the hand of God, fight like you never fought before, but know that he will not leave you during this time. The hero is my dad, who met me in love. The hero is the radio announcer named Jack Buck, and the nursing staff and the community who came around this little boy and breathed life into him when he did not see it for himself. And my friends, I think when you leave the theaters, when you leave the story, when you leave even this conversation we're having right now, you will recognize if God can use those ordinary individuals and this broken individual speaking the story over you right now, he most certainly can use your story, your life, your talents for good. But there is a challenge. You got to be bold enough and faithful enough and intrepid enough when given an opportunity to say yes. Say yes to being used for good. It may not only change your life, it might change the lives of those you encounter along the way. My name is John O'Leary, and I look forward to sharing this story with you in theaters around the country. You can learn more by going to soulonfiremovie.com.
The scene that John talks about with his father in the hospital, as a grown-up, I'm thinking, of course your dad isn't going to be mad at you. His concern is for you in this moment. But kids don't always know how to interpret the situations that they're in. And maybe young John was like waiting for his parents' response to gauge the severity of the situation. I don't know. But I know that this made me feel deeply. Maybe because I'm a son and a dad. John's dad comes down the hallway, he pulls the curtain back and he says, I've never been so proud of anyone in my entire life. I love you and there's nothing that you can do about it. That's the moment that I think we all just feel deeply when we hear John tell that. And what is that feeling? Maybe it's that there's something inside of each of us that's so drawn to grace that when we encounter it, undeserved and unconditional, it just leaves us undone. Well, if you want to see that moment acted out in the theater, Soul on Fire opens October 10th. It stars William H. Macy and many other actors that you'll recognize. You can find details at soulonfiremovie.com. The Unfolding is a faith podcast, and you can discover more podcasts like it at myfaithpodcasts.com.